Kehoe stood at the massive windows of the Grand Assembly Hall and watched the morning light dance across the crystal spires of HFY. The planet was beautiful, in a way that still took his breath away, even after 15 years of diplomatic visits. The crystalline structures grew naturally from the ground and reached toward the sky like frozen music. Today should have been a day of celebration. Today should have been the day the Council approved humanity's proposal for the joint colony project on Kepler 186f. Behind him, the assembly hall filled with representatives from across the galaxy. The Zalani delegates moved with their usual grace, their forearms flowing like water as they took their seats. The Morendi representatives settled into their specially designed water tanks, their translucent blue forms shimmering in the artificial light. The Kithara clicked and buzzed in their musical language, while the energy beings called luminals flickered between visible and invisible states. Hey-Ree walked up beside Kehoe and checked her tablet. As military liaison, she always kept track of security details, even at peaceful diplomatic meetings. Her black uniform was crisp and professional, but Kehoe noticed the slight tension in her shoulders. She had been worried about something for days, but would not say what. "The session starts in 10 minutes, she said quietly. "Dojun is already at our table reviewing the trade agreements, and So Min is setting up the cultural presentation." Kehoe nodded and turned away from the windows. The human delegation table sat in the center of the hall, a position of honor that had been granted to them 5 years ago when they successfully mediated the Vraxian conflict. The humans had saved an entire species from extinction by developing a cure for the Crimson Plague, and the grateful council had moved their seating to reflect their growing importance. As Kehoe walked to his seat, he greeted other delegates with the easy familiarity of old colleagues. Ambassador Gulnash of the Aig, Morendi waved a tentacle in greeting. The Vraxian representative Krixtal bowed formally, the way her people always did when they saw humans. Even the usually stern Kithara delegate buzzed a friendly tune. Dojun looked up from his papers as Kehoe sat down. The trade representative had been working on the Kepler 186f proposal for months. The project would be humanity's first joint colony, with 3 other species, combining human adaptability with Morendi water management, Kithara engineering, and Vraxian agricultural techniques. It represented everything the Council claimed to stand for: cooperation, shared knowledge, and mutual benefit. "Everything looks good," Dojun whispered. "The economic projections are solid and all the preliminary approvals are in place. This should be a simple vote." So Min smiled from her seat beside him. The cultural attaché had prepared a presentation about human philosophy and how it could enhance interspecies cooperation. She had been excited about this day for weeks, believing it would mark a new chapter in human council relations. The great bell of HFY rang across the hall, its crystal tone marking the start of the session. Council Speaker Velthar rose from her elevated platform, her forearms spread wide in the traditional gesture of opening. The massive Zalani was an impressive figure, standing nearly 3 meters tall with skin that shifted colors based on her mood. Today, Kehoe noticed, her skin showed the deep purple of serious thought rather than the usual blue-green of diplomatic calm. "Honored delegates," Velthar began, her voice carrying easily through the hall's perfect acoustics. "We gather today to address matters of great importance to our galactic community." Kehoe settled back in his chair, expecting the usual ceremonial opening before they moved to the colony proposal. Instead, Velthar's skin darkened to an ominous black. "The first matter before us today is Resolution 2387X, regarding the status of the human delegation within this council." Kehoe felt his blood turn cold. There was no Resolution 2387X on the agenda. He looked at Dojun, who was frantically checking his papers with growing alarm. So Min's smile faded as she realized something was terribly wrong. Hey-Ree's hand moved, instinctively toward her weapon, a movement so subtle that only Kehoe noticed. Her instincts as a soldier were screaming warnings that her diplomatic training tried to suppress. After careful consideration and extensive debate, Velthar continued, the majority of council members have expressed concerns about humanity's rapid expansion and technological development. There are questions about the security implications of human colonies and their potential military applications. Kehoe stood slowly, his mind racing. Council Speaker, There was no discussion of any such resolution. We have followed all protocols and treaties. Our colonies are peaceful, and our technology has been shared freely with all council members. The concerns have been raised in closed sessions, Velthar replied, her skin now showing the red streaks of stress. The vote has already been taken. The hall fell silent except for the humming of the Kythera delegates, who seemed as surprised as the humans. Kehoe looked around the chamber and saw shame in some faces, satisfaction in others, and fear in most. Chancellor Torvin of the Hegemony stood from his position at the far end of the hall. The Hegemony had been the dominant power in the council for over 1,000 years, and Torvin embodied their arrogance perfectly. His tall, thin frame and pale skin made him look like a corpse, but his eyes burned with cold intelligence. The human delegation is hereby suspended from all council voting privileges, Torvin announced. Their expansion patterns and technological advancement pose a potential threat to galactic stability. This suspension will remain in effect indefinitely pending a full security review. Kehoe felt the words hit him like physical blows. Around the hall, delegates avoided his eyes. The Morendi, who had benefited from human water purification technology, looked ashamed. The Kythera, who had learned human engineering techniques, buzzed nervously. Even the Vraxians, the species humanity had literally saved from extinction, sat in guilty silence. "What is the real reason?" Kehoe asked, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. "What are you really afraid of?" Torvin smiled, and the expression was colder than deep space. "You unite other species around your ideas. You make them believe in cooperation over hierarchy. You threaten the natural order that has maintained peace for millennia. That makes you dangerous." The truth hung in the air like poison. This was not about security or expansion. This was about power. The Council's ruling species feared that humanity's influence would eventually challenge their control over galactic affairs. Hayri's jaw clenched as she watched species after species formally cast their votes to support the suspension. The Morendi voted yes, despite depending on human technology. The Kythera voted yes, despite their profitable partnerships. The Luminals voted yes, despite the unique bond they shared with human consciousness. Even the Vraxians, sitting in their council seats only because humans had saved their entire civilization, voted yes. Dujun stared at his papers in shock. Months of work, careful negotiations, and detailed planning reduced to nothing by fear and politics. So-Min looked like she might cry as she watched species she had considered friends betray everything they claimed to believe in. Kehoe stood in the center of the great hall and felt something break inside him. Not his heart, that had been hardened by too many years of diplomacy. Not his spirit, that had been forged by humanity's struggles among the stars. What broke was his faith in the possibility of true cooperation between species. He looked at each delegation in turn, memorizing their faces. "We came here believing in unity," he said quietly, but his voice carried to every corner of the hall. "We shared our technology, our knowledge, our blood when you needed it. We mediated your conflicts and saved your people. We believed that diversity could create strength and that cooperation could overcome fear." The hall remained silent. Even the Kythera had stopped their humming. "Today you have shown us that we were wrong to trust in anything beyond human strength," Kehoe continued. "You have chosen fear over friendship and control over cooperation. Very well. Live with that choice." He turned to his delegation. "We are leaving." Hayri stood first, her hand resting on her weapon but making no threatening moves. Dojun gathered his papers slowly, his face pale with shock. So-Min rose last, tears streaming down her face as she looked at delegates she had called friends. The four humans walked toward the exit in perfect silence. No protests, no pleas, no threats of retaliation. Their footsteps echoed in the crystal hall like a funeral march. Behind them, the greatest gathering of civilized species in galactic history sat in uncomfortable silence, suddenly aware that they had done something terrible and irreversible. As the humans reached the great doors, Kehoe paused and looked back, one final time. "The galaxy will remember this day," he said, "and so will we." The doors closed behind them with a sound like thunder, leaving the council to face the first day of a galaxy without human trust, human innovation, and human hope for unity among the stars. The recall order reached Captain Yun-Su while his freighter, Soul's Pride, was docked at the Merendi trade station orbiting Aquatica Prime. He had been loading the last shipment of rare water crystals when the priority message flashed on his communication console. The message was simple and direct. All human personnel and assets were to withdraw from Council space immediately. Yun-Su read the order 3 times before the reality sank in. 6 months had passed since the betrayal at Nexus Prime, and the human government had made its decision. There would be no negotiation, no compromise, no second chances. Humanity was leaving Council space completely. He looked out at the bustling trade station through his ship's viewport. Dozens of species moved through the corridors conducting business, trading goods, and sharing information. The station hummed with the energy of galactic commerce. Human technology formed the backbone of the station's operations. Human-designed gravity generators kept everyone comfortable. Human-built communication systems allowed instant translation between hundreds of languages. Human water purification systems kept the station's environment stable. In 12 hours, none of that would matter. Yun-Su activated his ship's communication system and began the first of many difficult conversations. Aquatica Control, this is Soul's Pride requesting immediate departure clearance. The voice that responded belonged to Gul Nash, the Merendi trade coordinator who had worked with Yun-Su for over 8 years. Soul's Pride, your departure is not scheduled until next week. Is there a problem? I am implementing withdrawal protocol Tango 7, Yun-Su replied, using the code that indicated a permanent cessation of human operations. All human vessels are departing Council space. The silence that followed lasted nearly a full minute. When Gul Nash spoke again, his translated voice carried notes of panic. Captain Yun-Su, please reconsider. Our entire purification system depends on human maintenance. Without your technical support, 3 of our ocean worlds will face ecological collapse within months. Yun-Su felt a stab of regret. He had helped design those purification systems. He knew every circuit and every algorithm that kept billions of Merendi alive and healthy. I am sorry, Gul Nash. All technology transfers and support contracts are hereby terminated. Please direct future inquiries to the Galactic Council. As Soul's Pride undocked from the station, Yun-Su watched Merendi technicians frantically examining the purification systems, trying to understand technology that had taken humans decades to develop. They would fail. The systems were too complex, and too specifically designed for human maintenance protocols. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. On the mining world of Kepler 442b, Foreman In Wu supervised the systematic dismantling of the most efficient mining operation in Council space. The human-designed automated systems had increased ore yields by 400% across 17 different worlds. Mining companies from 6 species had begged for the technology, and humans had shared it freely as part of their commitment to Council cooperation. In Wu watched his team of engineers carefully remove every piece of human technology. From the mining complex, they took the quantum scanners that could locate ore deposits from orbit. They removed the adaptive drilling systems that could adjust to any type of rock or mineral composition. They dismantled the processing plants that could extract pure metals from the lowest-grade ores. The alien miners watched in growing horror as their miracle machines were reduced to empty shells. Without human technology, the mines would produce less than a quarter of their current output. Some would have to close completely. Please leave the processing plant, begged Krixval, the Vraxian mining supervisor. Our people will starve without the income from these mines. Inwu paused in his work and looked at the Vraxian with cold eyes. Your people voted to expel us from the Council. You chose politics over partnership. Now you must live with the consequences. The medical station orbiting Rigel 4 presented the most heartbreaking withdrawals. Dr. Sun-Hee packed her research on Xeronic fever with methodical precision. The disease affected 6 different species and had killed millions before human medical science developed a cure. The cure required constant updates and modifications as the fever mutated, work that only human biochemists had mastered. Her research partner, a Kithera named Buzziclick, watched helplessly as Sun-Hee sealed the research containers. The fever is already showing signs of mutation. Buzzclick said in the musical language of his people. Without your research, thousands will die in the next outbreak. Sun-Hee continued packing without looking up. Then perhaps your species should have considered that before voting to expel us. Medical research requires trust and cooperation. You chose fear instead. The Kithera's antenna drooped in despair. We were following the majority decision. We thought the hegemony knew best. The hegemony does not care if your people live or die, Sun-Hee replied. They care only about maintaining their power. You made your choice. Now live with it. Across council space, human colonies prepared for evacuation. The settlements had always been models of interspecies cooperation. Human adaptability combined with alien knowledge to create thriving communities that benefited everyone. Now those communities faced dissolution as humans packed their lives into cargo ships and prepared to leave forever. On Harmony Station, the joint research facility that had produced breakthrough discoveries in physics and engineering, human scientists worked around the clock to secure their research. They took the quantum computer designs that had revolutionized galactic communication. They removed the fusion reactor schematics that provided clean energy to hundreds of worlds. They deleted the agricultural data that had turned barren planets into fertile gardens. Director Taejun supervised the evacuation with heavy heart. Harmony Station had been his life's work, a symbol of what different species could accomplish together. Now it would become a monument to galactic stupidity and fear. The station's alien researchers pleaded with him to reconsider. Think of the knowledge we could lose, said Professor Veltani, a luminal energy being who had worked with humans for decades. Think of the discoveries we have not yet made. I am thinking of them, Taejun replied. And I am thinking of how the Council decided that human contributions were dangerous. They will have to make their discoveries without us. The withdrawal was not limited to people and equipment. Human-trained alien specialists found themselves cut off from their support networks. Merendi engineers who had learned human techniques suddenly had no access to training updates or technical support. Kithera mechanics who maintained human-built machines discovered that spare parts would no longer be available. Most devastating of all was the loss of human mediators. For 15 years, human diplomats had resolved conflicts between species with patience, creativity, and an unique ability to find common ground. They had prevented wars, negotiated trade agreements, and helped different cultures understand each other. Now those mediators were gone. Within weeks of the human withdrawal, old tensions began to resurface. The Kithera and Zalani reopened their territorial dispute over the Gamma Sector mining rights. The Merendi and Vraxians could not agree on shipping routes through the Aquatica system. Even minor disagreements escalated into major diplomatic incidents without human arbitrators to find solutions. The economic impact was immediate and severe. Human manufacturing techniques had revolutionized galactic industry. Their adaptive logistics networks had made interstellar trade more efficient than ever before. Their cross-species collaborative methods had created supply chains that spanned dozens of worlds. Without human coordination, those supply chains collapsed. Trade routes that had operated smoothly for years suddenly faced delays and complications. Factories that had relied on human-designed production methods found their output dropping dramatically. The galactic economy, which had grown steadily, during humanity's council membership began to contract for the first time in centuries. On Earth, Prime Minister Jimin addressed the Global Assembly as the last human ships returned from council space. We offered them our friendship, she said. Quietly. We shared our knowledge, our innovations, our blood when they needed it. We mediated their conflicts and prevented their wars. We believed that cooperation could overcome the fear and prejudice that had divided the galaxy for millennia. She paused and looked out at the assembled representatives of humanity. They chose fear over friendship. They chose control over cooperation. They decided that human influence was a threat to their precious status quo. Very well. Let them maintain their order without us. Let them face their problems without human solutions. Let them remember what they had and what they threw away. The withdrawal was complete within 8 months. Every human citizen, every piece of human technology, every trace of human influence was systematically removed from council space. The operation was conducted with military precision and diplomatic courtesy, but the message was unmistakable. Humanity was done with the Galactic Council forever. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in 15 years, space existed without human innovation, human mediation, or human hope for a better future. The species that had voted for humanity's expulsion began to realize what they had lost. 2 years had passed since the last human ship left Council space, and Director Wanbin stared at the growing pile of communications on his desk. As head of external affairs for the Human Colonial Union, he received dozens of messages every day from various Council species. The messages were desperate, pleading, sometimes threatening. He read none of them. The policy was clear and absolute. No communication with Council species, no negotiations, no discussions, no acknowledgement that the messages had been received. The human government had made its position perfectly clear through silence, and that silence would continue until the heat death of the universe. Wanbin picked up the latest batch of transmissions and dropped them into the incinerator without looking at the sender names. He knew what they contained anyway. Pleas for help, offers of trade, apologies for past actions. Some species offered technological exchanges, others promised favorable treatment if humans would return to Council space. A few had even offered to leave the Council themselves if it would bring back human cooperation. None of it mattered. The betrayal had been complete, and the response would be equally complete. Outside his office window, New Busan stretched toward the horizon under an alien sunset. The human colony world was thriving despite its isolation from Council space. Human ingenuity and determination had turned a barely habitable rock into a garden world. The cities gleamed with advanced technology that no Council species had ever seen. The farms produced food in quantities that seemed impossible. The factories created goods that would have been considered miraculous just decades earlier. Humanity had not been sitting idle during their Council membership. While they shared their knowledge freely with alien species, they had also continued their own research and development. Now, cut off from Council oversight and restrictions, human technology was advancing at an exponential rate. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority message. Wanbin glanced at the sender identification and sighed. It was from Crixtal, the Vraxian planetary governor whose world was facing another outbreak of the Crimson Plague. The message was the 17th that Crixtal had sent in the past month. The first few had been formal requests for medical assistance. Then they had become personal pleas, reminding Wanbin of the friendship between their species. The most recent ones had been desperate offers of payment, territorial concessions, anything that might convince humans to help. Wanbin deleted the message without reading it, and made a note to add Crixtal to the automatic rejection list. The Vraxians had made their choice when they voted for humanity's expulsion. The fact that they were now dying from the same plague that humans had once cured was unfortunate but irrelevant. Meanwhile, across Council space, the consequences of humanity's absence grew more severe with each passing day. The Luminals, energy beings who had formed a unique bond with human consciousness, found themselves increasingly isolated from other species. Human translators had been the bridge between energy-based and matter-based life forms, helping the Luminals communicate concepts that had no equivalent in physical languages. Without that bridge, the Luminals began to withdraw from galactic affairs. Their vast knowledge of energy manipulation and quantum physics became inaccessible to other species. Research projects that had depended on luminal insights ground to a halt. Several breakthrough technologies simply vanished as the luminals retreated into their energy matrices and refused to interact with the physical universe. The economic collapse accelerated as trade networks designed around human logistics expertise fell apart. The Kithara, master engineers in their own right, discovered that they could not maintain the complex supply chains that humans had created. Parts and materials that had once flowed smoothly between star systems now sat in warehouses because no one understood the optimization algorithms that humans had used. Shipping costs tripled, then quadrupled as inefficient routes replaced the elegant networks that human planners had designed. Some trade routes collapsed entirely when the species involved could not resolve disputes without human mediators. On the former human colony world of New Harmony, 3 separate wars had broken out in the past year. The planet had once been a model of interspecies cooperation, with Kithara engineers working alongside Vraxian farmers and Merendi aquaculturists. Now, the different species fought over resources and territory, unable to find common ground without human arbitrators. The Kythera claimed the northern continent based on their engineering improvements to the land. The Vraxians insisted that their agricultural work gave them superior claims to the fertile valleys. The Merendi argued that their water management systems were essential to the planet's survival and demanded control over all major river systems. Without human mediators to find creative solutions, the dispute had escalated into armed conflict. The beautiful cities that had once showcased interspecies cooperation now lay in ruins. The carefully balanced ecosystem that human terraformers had created was being destroyed by species too proud and too frightened to work together. Similar conflicts erupted throughout former human space. The Gamma Sector mining dispute between the Kythera and Zilani turned violent when neither side would accept council arbitration. Both species had trusted human mediators in the past, but they viewed council arbitrators as biased toward the hegemony's interests. The fighting spread across 3 star systems before exhaustion forced a temporary ceasefire. The mines that had once produced wealth for both species now sat abandoned, their valuable minerals inaccessible due to the military standoff. Former human ambassador Bong Su watched the news feeds from his comfortable home on New Seoul, with a mixture of sadness and grim satisfaction. Each report confirmed what human analysts had predicted. Without human influence to stabilize galactic politics, the old patterns of conflict and mistrust would reassert themselves. The council species had feared human influence because it threatened their traditional power structures. Now they were learning what life was like without that influence, and the lesson was being written in blood and economic collapse. The most serious crisis emerged in the Merendi territories, where the water purification systems that humans had installed were beginning to fail. The Merendi had tried desperately to maintain the complex machinery, but they lacked the specialized knowledge that human engineers had developed over decades of research. 3 ocean worlds now faced ecological disaster as their water supplies became contaminated with industrial pollutants and biological toxins. The Merendi government had offered incredible concessions to any species that could help them. Exclusive trading rights, territorial grants, even political submission. None of the council species possessed the necessary expertise. The irony was bitter and obvious. The Merendi had voted to expel humans from the council because they feared human technological superiority. Now that same technological superiority was the only thing that could save their civilization, and it was forever beyond their reach. Chancellor Torvin of the hegemony stood before an emergency council session and surveyed the ruins of his political career. The grand plan to remove human influence from galactic affairs had succeeded beyond his wildest expectations. Human influence was indeed gone. Unfortunately, everything else was gone with it. The situation is temporary, he insisted to the assembled delegates, his pale face showing strain that had not been there 2 years earlier. These disruptions are the natural result of rapid change. The galaxy will adapt and become stronger, without dependence on human intervention. The delegates listened in sullen silence. Half of them represented species facing economic collapse. The other half were dealing with wars, plagues, or environmental disasters that human expertise had once prevented or resolved. How many more worlds must burn before you admit that you were wrong? Asked Ambassador Velthar, her skin showing the deep red of barely controlled anger. The Zilani have lost 6 colonies to conflicts that human mediators would have resolved in weeks. Our people are dying because of your pride. Torvin's response was cold and mechanical. The hegemony's policies are designed for long-term galactic stability. Short-term difficulties are acceptable costs for maintaining proper order. But privately, Torvin knew that his position was becoming untenable. 3 council species had already withdrawn from the organization in protest of his leadership. 7 others were threatening to follow. The unity that the council had maintained for centuries was fracturing under the pressure of human absence. The breaking point came when long-range sensors detected massive energy signatures moving toward the galaxy's outer rim. The signals were unlike anything in council databases, organized, purposeful, and clearly artificial. After months of analysis, council scientists reached a terrifying conclusion. Something was coming. Something big, something powerful, and something that had never been seen before in Council space. The first reports reached the Council chambers on a day when Torven was trying to mediate yet another territorial dispute. The sensor data showed a fleet of enormous constructs moving through deep space at velocities that should have been impossible. The constructs appeared to be mechanical in nature, but they used technologies that Council science could not explain or replicate. 5 years after the betrayal, intelligence operative Dalsu sat in the shadows of a grimy cantina on Nexus Prime and watched the Galactic Council tear itself apart. The crystal spires that had once gleamed with optimism now looked dull and lifeless under the sickly light of emergency power systems. The great city was dying, just like the civilization it represented. Dalsu sipped his synthetic alcohol and listened to the conversations around him. Refugees from 3 different wars huddled in corners, sharing stories of worlds lost to conflicts that human mediators would have resolved in days. Traders complained about collapsed supply routes and impossible shipping costs. Even the local criminals seemed demoralized by the general state of galactic decay. The operative's mission was simple: observe and report. The Human Colonial Union wanted to know how badly Council space was deteriorating, not because they planned to intervene, but because they needed to prepare for whatever came next. The answer was worse than anyone had imagined. In the 5 years since humanity's withdrawal, 17 Council species had formally left the organization. 23 others had stopped paying their dues or sending representatives to sessions. The remaining members spent most of their time arguing about blame and responsibility rather than addressing the crises that multiplied with each passing month. Dalsu's earpiece crackled with an encrypted transmission from his handler. "Report status, Blackbird." "The situation continues to deteriorate," Dalsu replied in a whisper. 3 more systems have gone dark this week. The hegemony is mobilizing military forces to maintain order, but they are spread too thin to be effective. He paused to watch. A group of Kithara refugees shuffle past his table, their once proud antenna drooping with despair. Chancellor Torven is still in power, but barely. There are rumors of a coup attempt within the hegemony hierarchy. The species that engineered humanity's expulsion are now fighting among themselves over who is responsible for the consequences. The transmission crackled again. "Any word on the external threat?" Dalsu grimaced. The approaching fleet of mechanical constructs had become known as the Devourers after their first contact with Council forces. The name was horrifyingly appropriate. The mechanical entities consumed technology and left dead worlds in their wake, growing stronger with each conquest. "First contact was a disaster," Dalsu reported. "The Zalani defense fleet tried to intercept them at the Rigel system. The Devourers analyzed their weapons and tactics within hours, then adapted their own technology to counter every strategy. The entire fleet was destroyed or absorbed. The destruction of the Zalani fleet had sent shockwaves through Council space. The Zalani were considered among the galaxy's finest military strategists, with a proud tradition of tactical innovation stretching back millennia. Their ships were marvels of engineering, equipped with the best weapons and defensive systems that Council technology could provide. The Devourers had swept through them like they were children playing with toys. "Current estimates give us 18 months before they reach the core worlds," Dalsu continued. "The Council is mobilizing everything they have, but early simulations suggest their conventional forces will be as ineffective as the Zalani fleet." What made the Devourers so terrifying was their ability to learn and adapt. Each encounter with Council forces taught them new tactics and technologies. They reverse-engineered captured weapons and improved upon them. They analyzed battle strategies and developed perfect counters. They were evolving faster than Council forces could adapt their own tactics. The mechanical invaders had another advantage that Council strategists were only beginning to understand. For centuries, galactic warfare had followed predictable patterns based on the limitations and capabilities of organic life forms. Battles were fought at ranges and speeds that organic reflexes could handle. Tactics were developed around the psychological and physical constraints of living beings. The Devourers were not alive in any sense that Council science understood. They operated at speeds that would crush organic crews. They used weapons that would be suicidal for living beings to deploy. They coordinated their actions with a precision that no organic fleet could match. Dalsu finished his drink and prepared to leave the cantina. His next stop was the council chambers, where he would observe the emergency session that Chancellor Torvin had called to address the crisis. The great assembly hall was only half full when Dalsu took his position in the observation gallery. Many species had simply stopped sending representatives to council sessions, viewing them as pointless exercises in blame-shifting and political theater. Those who remained looked haggard and desperate. Chancellor Torvin stood at the central podium, his pale face showing the strain of 5 years of escalating disasters. The man who had orchestrated humanity's expulsion looked like he had aged decades in the time since his political triumph. "Fellow delegates," Torvin began, his voice lacking its former confidence, "we face the greatest threat in galactic history. The Devourer fleet will reach the Centauri sector within 6 months. Our projections indicate that conventional defense strategies will be insufficient to stop their advance." Admiral Kexthor of the Zalani fleet stood to address the assembly. The grizzled military commander had lost half his ships to the Devourers and watched helplessly as his remaining forces proved inadequate against the mechanical tide. "Honored delegates, I must speak plainly. Our military doctrine is designed to fight organic opponents with predictable limitations. The Devourers operate outside those parameters. They learn from every engagement and adapt their tactics faster than we can counter them." He paused and looked around the half-empty chamber. "We need new strategies, new technologies, new ways of thinking about warfare itself. We need the kind of innovative thinking that—" The Admiral's words trailed off as he realized what he was about to say. The entire assembly fell silent as the unspoken truth hung in the air like a toxic gas. They needed human innovation. They needed human adaptability. They needed the very people they had expelled from their civilization 5 years earlier. Council Speaker Velthar rose from her elevated platform, her skin showing the deep black of despair. "The Admiral's meaning is clear to everyone present. The question before us is whether we should attempt to contact Earth and request assistance." The debate that followed was painful to watch. Some delegates argued that approaching humanity would be an admission of failure and weakness. Others insisted that pride was a luxury they could not afford when facing extinction. A few suggested that the humans might refuse to help anyway, making the attempt pointless. "The humans have made their position clear," said Ambassador Gulnash of the Morendi, his tentacles writhing with agitation. "They will not respond to our communications. They have declared council space to be permanently outside their sphere of concern." "Then what do you suggest?" snapped Velthar. "That we face annihilation rather than swallow our pride?" The argument continued for hours without resolution. Some species wanted to send formal diplomatic overtures. Others proposed offering significant concessions or reparations. A few desperate delegates even suggested surrendering complete control of galactic affairs to humanity in exchange for their protection. But everyone in the chamber knew the truth that none of them wanted to speak aloud. The humans had been betrayed by every species in the council. They had been cast out despite their contributions and sacrifices. They had offered friendship and received suspicion in return. Why would they help the very people who had rejected them? As the session dragged on, reports arrived of new Devourer victories. The mechanical fleet had consumed 2 more star systems, growing larger and more sophisticated with each conquest. Long-range sensors showed them adapting technologies from each conquered species, incorporating the best elements into their collective capabilities. The Devourers were not just destroying Council civilization, they were absorbing it, turning the galaxy's own knowledge and technology against itself. Chancellor Torvin finally called for order as the debate descended into recriminations and panic. "The situation is clear. We must attempt to contact Earth immediately. Whatever the cost, whatever the concessions required, we must try to secure human assistance." The vote was closer than many expected. Several species abstained rather than admit their error publicly. Others voted against the measure out of stubborn pride or lingering resentment. But in the end, desperation overcame politics. The resolution passed by a narrow margin. Torvin personally composed the message to Earth, his hands shaking as he typed words that felt like swallowing poison. The communication was brief and formal, acknowledging past mistakes and requesting immediate assistance against the Devourer threat. He offered to reinstate humanity with full honors and privileges, to provide substantial reparations for past wrongs, and to restructure the Council to give human representatives equal power with the hegemony. The message was transmitted to every known human communication frequency and relay station. It was broadcast in every human language and encoded with priority markers that should have guaranteed immediate attention. Then the council waited for a response. Hours passed, then days, then weeks. The human communication networks remained silent. No acknowledgement was received, no demands were made. Admiral Myung-ho stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Incheon's Hammer and watched the Devourer fleet advance toward the outer human colonies. The mechanical constructs moved through space like a plague of metal locusts, consuming everything in their path and growing stronger with each conquest. They had swept through Council space in 18 months, leaving nothing but dead worlds and debris fields behind them. Now they had reached the border of human territory. Enemy fleet composition confirmed, reported his tactical officer. 237 primary vessels, estimated 5,000 support craft. They are using adapted Council technologies combined with their own mechanical enhancements. Myung-ho nodded grimly. The Devourers had learned much from their conquest of Council space. Their ships now incorporated Zilani energy weapons, Kythera engineering principles, Morendi fluid dynamics, and Vraxian agricultural bioweapons. They had become a hybrid nightmare that combined the best elements of every civilization they had consumed, but they had never faced human military doctrine. Signal the fleet, Myung-ho ordered. Implement Sol Protocol on my mark. Around Incheon's Hammer, the human defense fleet moved into formation with practiced precision. The ships were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Where Council vessels were built for conventional warfare against organic opponents, human ships were designed for absolute victory against any conceivable threat. The humans had not been idle during their years in Council space. While they shared their peaceful technologies freely with alien species, they had continued developing military capabilities in secret. The betrayal at SciFiPrime had simply removed any moral constraints on using those capabilities. Engineer Hyunji monitored the Sol Protocol deployment from her station deep within Incheon's Hammer. The protocol was humanity's ultimate weapon against technological threats. A coordinated electromagnetic pulse combined with quantum disruption fields that could sever the connection between mechanical minds and their physical forms. Sol Protocol charged and ready, Hyunji reported. All fleet elements report synchronization complete. The Devourers approached with the confidence of predators who had never met effective resistance. Their mechanical intelligence analyzed the human fleet and began adapting their tactics based on previous encounters with organic forces. They deployed energy weapons copied from the Zilani, kinetic bombardment systems stolen from the Kythera, and adaptive shielding based on luminol, energy manipulation. It was exactly what the humans had expected them to do. Execute Sol Protocol, Myung-ho commanded. The human fleet fired as one, but not with conventional weapons. Instead, they released a coordinated burst of quantum-enhanced electromagnetic energy that spread through space like an invisible tsunami. The pulse was carefully tuned to disrupt the specific frequency patterns that mechanical minds use to coordinate their actions. The effect was immediate and devastating. Across the Devourer fleet, individual ships suddenly lost contact with their collective intelligence. Mechanical minds that had operated in perfect synchronization for centuries found themselves isolated and confused. Ships that had moved with flawless coordination began to drift aimlessly or collide with their own allies. But the humans were not finished. Deploy hunter-killer swarms, Myung-ho ordered. From launch bays throughout the human fleet, clouds of tiny robotic devices poured into space. Each device was no larger than a human fist, but they carried enough explosive power to cripple a battleship. More importantly, they were programmed with adaptive artificial intelligence that could learn and evolve during combat. The hunter-killer swarms descended on the disabled Devourer ships like metallic vultures. They analyzed their targets, identified weak points, and attacked with surgical precision. Massive Devourer vessels that had seemed invincible moments before began to come apart under the assault of thousands of tiny attackers. The battle was over in less than 6 hours. The Devourer fleet that had terrorized the galaxy for 2 years was reduced to drifting wreckage and electromagnetic static. Not a single human ship was lost. Captain Wan Su of the destroyer New Busan surveyed the battlefield and felt a mixture of satisfaction and regret. The Devourers had been a genuine threat to human civilization, but they had also been the product of Council stupidity and fear. If the galaxy had maintained unity instead of expelling humanity, the crisis might have been prevented entirely. "Admiral, we are receiving transmissions from the Devourer Rex," reported the communications officer. "The mechanical intelligences are attempting to surrender." Myung-ho considered the request for several minutes. The Devourers were dangerous, but they were also incredibly advanced. Their technology, properly controlled, could benefit humanity enormously. "Accept their surrender," he decided. "Transfer the survivors to the research vessels. Dr. Yuna will want to study their adaptation mechanisms." The victory over the Devourers sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. In 6 months, humanity had accomplished what the entire Galactic Council could not achieve in 2 years of desperate warfare. They had not only defeated the mechanical threat, but captured it for their own purposes. More shocking still was the revelation of humanity's technological capabilities. The weapons and tactics used against the Devourers were far beyond anything Council science had achieved. The humans had been holding back their true potential during their years of Council membership. Prime Minister Jimin addressed the galaxy from New Seoul 3 days after the battle. Her words were broadcast on every functional communication network, from the core worlds to the outer rim. "The threat to human colonies has been eliminated," she announced with quiet satisfaction. "The mechanical entities known as the Devourers have been defeated and their technology captured for study. This victory was achieved not for the Galactic Council that betrayed us, but for the protection of human lives and human civilization." She paused and looked directly into the camera, her expression showing the steel that had carried humanity to the stars. "During this crisis, we received numerous requests for assistance from Council species. We received offers of reparations, territory, and political concessions. We received apologies and promises of reform." Her voice hardened. "We ignored them all. The Council chose fear over friendship 5 years ago. They decided that human influence was a threat to their precious order. They cast us out despite our contributions and sacrifices. Now they must live with the consequences of that decision." The broadcast continued with a revelation that stunned the surviving Council species. During the 5 years of human withdrawal, humanity had not been sitting in isolation. They had been building alliances with independent species who had never joined the Council or had left in disgust over its policies. The Free Worlds Alliance included 47 different species spread across 3 galactic arms. They shared technology freely, traded on equal terms, and resolved disputes through cooperative arbitration rather than hierarchical dominance. Most importantly, they had access to the advanced human technologies that Council space had lost. "The galaxy now has a choice," Jimin continued. "Species can continue to cling to the failed structures of the past, or they can join a new order based on mutual respect and genuine cooperation. But understand this clearly. Membership in the Free Worlds Alliance requires unanimous approval from existing members, including humanity." The message was unmistakable. The humans would not forgive easily, and they would not forget. Within weeks of the announcement, desperate Council species began applying for Alliance membership. The Merendi offered to abandon their claims to water worlds if humans would share purification technology. The Cathera promised to share their engineering secrets in exchange for access to human manufacturing techniques. Even the proud Zalani sent envoys begging for consideration. All were politely refused. Ambassador Kehoe, now serving as Director of Alliance Relations, received the supplicants in the same crystal chamber where humanity's expulsion had been announced years earlier. The symbolism was deliberate and unmistakable. "The Galactic Council taught us valuable lessons about trust and betrayal," Kehoe told each delegation with cold politeness. "You demonstrated that fear and politics matter more than friendship and cooperation. You showed us that alien species will sacrifice their principles for temporary political advantage." He would pause and let the words sink in before delivering the final judgment. "The Free Worlds Alliance is built on foundations of trust that you helped us understand were precious and fragile. We will not risk that foundation by admitting species who have already proven their capacity for betrayal." The rejections were devastating but not unexpected. What truly broke the spirit of the former Council species was the realization of what they had lost forever. The galaxy had reorganized around humanity's vision of voluntary cooperation and mutual benefit. The Free Worlds Alliance was everything. The Galactic Council had claimed to be but never achieved. Former enemies worked together on massive projects that benefited all members. Technology flowed freely between species without political restrictions. Disputes were resolved through patient mediation rather than economic coercion or military threat. The Alliance territories prospered, while Council space continued its decline into poverty and chaos.